20 more workers. So sign up out there, okay? It always scares me when there's no response to that, boy. I tell you what. All right, I want you to turn to 1 Samuel. And I want to talk to you about Mother's Day, but I want to talk to you about dealing with barrenness. Dealing with barrenness. The reason I've chosen the story of Hannah is it represents so many different facets of life. Hannah is going to be the mother of Samuel. Now, let me tell you this about Hannah. Hannah is a woman that obviously is barren, but now her prayer is going to be, Lord, change my barrenness into fruitfulness. And because she prays that prayer, along comes Samuel. And that's the story that we're going to deal with. But Samuel is going to be a prophet of God that is really going to initiate a process by which Israel is going to have a complete revolution for about the next 130 years. And it all comes back to this one person, Samuel. Samuel is the one that's going to direct Israel through the anointing of King Saul and then to King David. And then David basically does all this war and settles all of the borders around Israel. Then Solomon becomes king, and then you see Israel having this huge impact basically upon the world. And it all starts with this guy by the name of Samuel. But before that, with his mother. But before Samuel was born, Hannah had an incredible struggle with her inability to conceive. I really didn't realize this, friends, and I know that I'm not going to win any kind of award for most sensitive pastor, but I did not understand until a pastor on staff laid a couple of articles on my desk about 3 or 4 weeks ago, whose name will remain quiet, but her initials are Shalane. Laid these couple of articles on my desk, and as I began to read over it, and by the way, I knew about 2 months ago that I was going to speak on Hannah on Mother's Day. I was reading through it, and I just knew that's what I was supposed to do. And then Shalane put these articles on my desk, and as I began to read this, I realized for the first time maybe in my life that Mother's Day is sometimes a very, very painful experience for some ladies. And I was just kind of blown away by that, just the insensitive Dan. And I was thinking, man, where have I been? There may be those who have had to force themselves to come to church because it reminds you of what you don't have. For some, it might be the recent loss of your own mother, or for others, it could be the inability to conceive your own children. Still, for others, this day reminds you more than any other of the child that you lost. And as a pastor, I just want to stop and say, I'm just amazed at people that walk through that. Just amazed. Or the marriage that didn't work out, or the unexpected illness or disease. This doesn't just have to apply to women. This could be either gender, facing any kind of barrenness in your life. So guys, don't stop listening, okay? First, I would like you to note that Mother's Day is not a biblical holiday. It's not mentioned in the Bible, although it does say for us to honor and respect our mothers and our fathers. And friends, one of the reasons I want to teach on Mother's Day, and also I'm going to teach about my dad on Father's Day, is because of this particular principle right here. I think it is so important in our culture to raise again the influence of what mothers and fathers are all about and that kind of a relationship and how it has impact in every area of our life if we don't get it right there. So I really want to talk about that. What Hannah represents is someone who is in agony of soul because she can't tolerate the situation any longer. Ever been there? Okay, you don't have to, but interesting enough, now notice this is really interesting to me. The place she feels the most pain about her barrenness is in a place of worship. I mean, we're going to read that they come to a place of worship, and that's where her greatest pain is. Why is a place of worship such a double-edged sword? Do our defenses go down because it's a safe place and God takes advantage of the situation? I don't know the answer to this, but I do know that this is when Hannah becomes bare before God. Now, I had an interesting time trying to put this two words together. Now, I know the difference between barrenness and barrenness. But I actually had Joni, I said, you need to go look this up for me because something's getting confused here. And the more that I began to think about it, the more I thought, maybe God is in this little process of me being somewhat dyslexic, and maybe God's trying to say something to me. And here's the point that really came across to me. When Hannah comes to this place, I mean, she spills her guts before God. She becomes bare. And what I'm talking about, in her soul before God. And friends, let me just stop and say this to you. I think sometimes in Christianity, and especially we people that have been raised in the church, believe that only the times that God really loves us is when we're really good. And we don't think that He really loves us when our life begins to fall apart. And it's because every one of us in here tonight, under the sound of my voice, are really conditioned towards conditional love, and we don't understand that God loves every bit of us, even when our life isn't going good. And I want you to know that Hannah is at this place, and it seems to be that what is recorded in the Scriptures, when she actually breaks, and we'll talk about this, and she just becomes absolutely bare, in her response to God and saying, God, this is me, and this is how it is, and how it's all hanging out here. And it seems to be that when we become bare in our own bareness, that's when God's creative power comes and touches our barrenness. And what I really believe this weekend, at least it's what I feel anyway, the Lord has shown me that He's going to touch a lot of people's barrenness. Barrenness in your life. And some of you have been brought here for this weekend. You don't even know why you're here. And because God is going to start the process of saying, I can touch your life in a way that will bring meaning and purpose and fruitfulness. And you've been struggling with barrenness all your life, and I will accomplish something that you could never accomplish by yourself. And that's the story of Hannah. 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 4 to 20. And whenever the day came for Elkanah to sacrifice, he would give portions of the meat to his wife Peninnah and to all of her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he gave a double portion because he loved her, and the Lord had closed her womb. And because the Lord had closed her womb, her rival kept provoking her in order to irritate her. This went on year after year. Now, friends, I could speak 5 weeks on that one alone. Year after year after year. Any of you ever been there? You're not going to be a very cooperative crowd tonight, are you? And whenever Hannah went up to the house of the Lord, her rival provoked her until she wept and would not eat. And Elkanah, her husband, would say to her, Hannah, why are you weeping? Why don't you eat? Why are you downhearted? Don't I mean more to you than 10 sons? And once they had finished eating and drinking in Shiloh, Hannah stood up. Now Eli, the priest, was sitting on a chair by the doorpost of the Lord's temple. And in bitterness of soul, Hannah wept much and prayed to the Lord. And she made a vow, saying, O Lord Almighty, if you will only look upon your servant's misery and remember me and not forgive your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor will ever be used on his head. And as she kept on praying to the Lord, Eli observed her mouth, and Hannah was praying in her heart. And her lips were moving, but her voice was not heard. And Eli thought she was drunk, and said to her, how long will you keep on getting drunk? Get rid of your wine. Not so, my lord, Hannah replied. I am a woman who is deeply troubled. I have not been drinking wine or beer. I was pouring out my soul to the Lord. Do not take your servant for a wicked woman. I have been praying here out of my great anguish and grief. And Eli answered, go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant you what you ask for. And she said, may your servant find favor in your eyes. Then she went out and went her way and ate something, and her face was no longer downcast. And early the next morning they arose and worshiped before the Lord, and he went back to their home in Ramah. And Elkanah lay with Hannah his wife, and the Lord remembered her. So in the course of time, now notice this word. So in the course of time, Hannah conceived and gave birth to a son, and she named him Samuel, saying, because I asked the Lord for him. If you have little outlines, you want to follow along, let's take a look at 5 signs God is dealing with your barrenness. 5 signs. Number 1 is this. Recognize the lies your adversary tells. us. We recognize the lies our adversary tells us. Verses 5 and 6. But to Hannah he gave a double portion because he loved her and the Lord had closed her womb. And her rival kept provoking her in order to irritate her. Now notice this. Hannah was in a place where her husband's other wife would only provoke her and irritate her. And when our defenses are down and we are discouraged, it is a time when other people's words have such devastating effect upon us. Peninnah was the other wife, and believe you me, she knew how to get Hannah's goat. She knew what to say. Now, let me tell you what the dynamic was going on here, friends, because there's two dynamics that are happening in Hannah's life. Number one is this, is there's a cultural influence. And just let me say this to every one of us here tonight. You are fighting a cultural influence upon your life, and it has greater effect upon you than you would ever realize. And one of this cultural effect was this, is that if you couldn't conceive and have children, you were like an outcast. And so that was the cultural influence. That woman is no good because she could not conceive. And then the second dynamic that's probably even more powerful was actually that the family followed suit with the culture. And they started playing this game too. You are not any good. Now, friends, let me tell you something about every one of us that are sitting in here. And you might have known the Lord for all your life, but I want you to know that you are being influenced by an unseen enemy that is telling you lies in your mind that you and I believe. And I'll tell you exactly what Peninnah is telling Hannah. You're no good. And she's in a place of worship. Where's your faith? What about your God? Now, you hear something that's just universal right throughout every one of us that goes on in our minds. And it's more pronounced than any of us would ever think, and this is called a stronghold. Every one of us have a stronghold in our mind, and it raises itself up against the knowledge of God. And Paul says that we need to tear down those strongholds that exalts itself against the knowledge of God. And here's what God says, or what the enemy says to a lot of us. You're a failure. Now, if I took a survey around the room tonight and asked you, have any of you failed? Most hands would go up. 6 of us anyway. We admit it. We failed, you know. And the point of it is that what happens to us, and friends, just let me tell you this, and there's something about when you go through a divorce, and I want you to know we have numbers of people that have gone through a divorce, and there is something that happens in a divorce that makes people feel like when they're back in the church, there's some kind of a second-rate citizen in the kingdom of God, and it's not true. But you know what such a devastating fact is that when you talk to people that have been divorced, what they say is this, I am not only failed, but I am also a failure. And that's not true. What that is a stronghold. And you will hear that message coming to you lots of times, and what you have to do is, now wait a second. What does that mean? Does that mean that I'm a failure in God's eyes? Because I can tell you what the opposite of failure is. It is not victory. You know what the opposite of failure is? Acceptance. See, and here's the whole conditional part of this thing, friends, that we just don't get to understand. Is that God has accepted us. Period. Now, see, I can preach this to you, but I don't believe it. See, and if you'd be honest, you'd say the same thing too. I know that God loves me unconditionally, but this whole thing, you know, so what I have to do is when those thoughts come to my mind, I am a failure, I know this, that when I bring light on the subject, which is God's truth about it, that I know this, darkness leaves at the speed of light. I am accepted. Period. Now, here's what's so great about Hannah. Hannah says, that is not who I am. I am not barren because I know that God's going to reverse my situation. And for some reason or another, she resisted the cultural influence and the family influence, and she said, this is my identity. I'm not the loser you thought I was. And this is not some kind of head game. I'm accepted. See, and I think sometimes we just read the scriptures and we go over them, but we never stop and really personalize it and say, I am accepted in the beloved. And nothing is ever going to change God's mind about me. Don't believe the lies of the enemy. Number 2, belief that God hears the cry of the brokenhearted. Belief that God hears the cry of the brokenhearted. Verse 10, in bitterness of soul, Hannah wept much and prayed to the Lord. Now, bitterness, here's what bitterness means. Expressive of severe pain, grief, or regret. There's a sound in a person's voice that immediately signals the severe situation that they were in. A few years ago, I was coming off a plane right out here at Walker Field. I was not cognitively aware of the person that was in front of me. And as soon as I walked through the doors, there were family members there waiting to greet whoever this person was. That's when my attention perked up. And as this person got closer, there was not a word that was said, but then there was this convulsing, crying, and something that nobody could ever produce by themselves. When you really are introduced to grief, you hear that sound. And there's nothing that can mask that. And so you walk away from that. I mean, this deep, deep sobbing, and obviously they'd lost a loved one. It was a bad situation. And you walk away from that and you go, I mean, and everybody around there, you did not have to tell anybody, this was really bad news. Why was that? It's because there was a sound in the voice that was full of bitterness. That's something painful, so painful, and it's something that you cannot, actors just can't do this. It's something that comes from the inner being, and it was just coming out of this person. How is it that when you can get on the phone with somebody that's hundreds or even 1,000 miles away, and they just say hello to you, and you know immediately and instinctively something is wrong? There's something that's going on. Friends, that's exactly where Hannah is. I mean, she is in bitterness of soul. And there is something that takes place here when Hannah gets into this place and she is in bitterness of soul that I believe it's at that point. It's an interesting study just to go back and look in the scriptures and see how many times God answers the cry of his children. See, I think sometimes what happens to us in prayer is we don't even know what we're praying about. But when we get to a place in our life where it is so deep, I want you to know you get an elevation, I think, in the sensitivity to who God is because of the depth of the cry that goes on. It was amazing to me. We're clear back at 1622 Glenwood. And our nursery was just right outside the door. And boy, we have some good stories about that. But, one baby would cry. And in those days, you didn't have all the babies that we have today. And one mother would stand up. I mean, that was our signals. The cry of the kid, and they'd go out. And so here's the thing, is that every parent knows when their kid's in trouble. It's amazing to sit around and hear a kid start crying when they're out playing in the street and the mom or dad go, oh, she's okay, or he's okay, no big deal. And then there's another cry and they go, ah! What is that? It's because they recognize the cry. Now here's the point, and here's what you've really got to understand that's going on with Hannah. Is that she's in bitterness of soul, but what does she do when she's in bitterness of soul? She prays. Now, I just want to tell you this, friends, and none of us are immune from this kind of thinking or even this kind of action, that when you're in bitterness of soul, you're going to go one or two ways. You're either going to pray or you're going to fix the thing yourself. And when you do it by yourself, friends, I want you to know you're going to be in big, big trouble. I almost said doo-doo, but you're not supposed to say that on Mother's Day weekend. Huh, Mom? So, the point of it is this. God, listen to this in Psalms 34:18. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Bitterness of soul. Something comes out. God goes, that's my kid. Number 3. Awareness that God advances his kingdom through our trials. Awareness that God advances his kingdom through our trials. Verse 11. And she made a vow, saying, O Lord Almighty, if you will only look upon your servant's misery and remember me, and not forget your servant, but give her a son, that I will give him to the Lord. Notice that Hannah is willing to give something meaningful in exchange for her barrenness. This is no small promise, friends. Have you ever noticed that about God? God will always lay his finger on something that's really, really important to you. The other things we'll give to him, but that one thing he puts his finger on, you go, ah! You know, all of us know that little cry too, don't we? This is no small promise that Hannah is making to the Lord. She is saying, I will give up something that is significant. Now listen to this. This is a huge deal because what Hannah is saying is, I will give up a huge part of raising my son. I will miss a significant part of his life. And every mother that I know of really wants to be involved with their kids. And to know that she is going to willingly take this boy at probably 6 or 7 years old and place him in the house of the Lord is a huge, huge issue in her life. And I believe that God will always bring us to a place of surrender about the issue that is dramatically important to us. David, listen to what David said, King David. What a man, David was. I will not, he says this twice, I will not sacrifice to the Lord that which costs me nothing. I just won't do it. You know, it's interesting to read the context of what he's talking about there, but he didn't feel like he was really giving something away unless it was really something that was special to the Lord. And so he says, give me that and I'll do something. Now here's the point, the poignant point about this, in my opinion, is that she gives away Samuel, but in return, God's kingdom advances because Samuel becomes the really first major prophet since Moses. And what happens now? The kingdom takes off and goes to a whole nother level because somebody is able and willing to sacrifice. Now let me just say this to you, friends. Been around the church, watched a lot of churches grow, watched a lot of mission organizations do whatever they do, and just a lot of Christian things do it. And every one of them that amount to something always comes at the point of sacrifice. Nothing goes forward without sacrifice. You see? And so when God brings you into this place and he's starting to deal with your barrenness, she gets to the places, I don't care what the cost is. You tell me what it is, and I'll do it. Because I can't live here anymore. I got to move on. Number 4. We have faith that God understands our heart. Verse 13. Hannah was praying in her heart, and her lips were moving, but her voice was not heard. And Eli thought she was drunk. Now, this issue of barrenness was solely between her and God. Nobody understands the depth of her pain or the problem that Hannah is suffering under. Hannah's husband didn't get it, friends. He asks a really dumb question. And because I'm somewhat of an expert on this, I can tell you that this is a dumb question. And here's how a dumb question goes, is that when you don't get a reply, and notice there is no reply from Hannah. In the scriptures, you have asked a dumb question because he says, do I not mean more to you than 10 sons? And she does one of these wife tilt the head and looks at him and says, what in the are you thinking about? He doesn't get it. He doesn't understand what's going on because lots of times, friends, and here's what you're going through in your life. Lots of times, nobody will get what you're or what you're going through. Nobody has the understanding of what's going on in your life, and it's impossible to relate it. As a matter of fact, I hate to even say this to you, but the pastor, Eli, the priest, had no conception as to what was going on. He thought she was drunk. I mean, you talk about, salt in the womb. It's just terrible. But here's what happens. Hannah was praying, and something signals from heaven above and says, Hannah, I understand. God understands our heart, friends. God knows what's going on. It's going to take a minute for me to develop this story for you. But a few weeks ago, Cheryl and I went up to a marriage retreat. And it's one of those weeks where I was desperate before God. And I was saying, God, I got to hear from you. I mean, this is one of those times in my life where I can't play games. I got to hear from you. Now, for me to develop this story, I'll have to take you back about 7 or 8 years ago. I started seeing the number 2 everywhere I went. And what I mean by that, like on baseball games, everything was 2 balls, 2 strikes, 2 outs. I'd come behind a car, and the car would be GVC 222. And it was driving me batty. I mean, I was just absolutely going bad. I'd wake up in the morning and look over at my clock, and it would be 5:22. You know, I'd look down at my watch, and it'd be 7:22 or whatever it was. And so finally, I was getting so, I don't know if psychotic is the right word about it, but I went to the staff, and I said, you guys, you got to pray for me because I'm not getting what's going on here, you know? And so they prayed for me. Now, this is the time that we're just about ready to move out here and really to launch into this particular program. And I'm going, oh, God, you know, we're going to spend a lot of money, and if you're not behind this, this is really going to smell bad all over the city. So I got to know. And so I was out for a run one day, and I'm running down Rincon Drive where I live, and I run right across this path, and then on my way back, I run right back across the same thing, and I notice some coinage. Now, I am not thinking anything else, just that, well, there's some money there. So I reach down, I'm praying the prayer, God, if you're really in this, you got to, I'm praying the prayer. I'm not thinking God's going to answer me. I reach down and pick up, that's my faith level. I reach down and I pick up the change and I start counting it out, and guess what it is? 22 cents. So that's a pretty good one, you know. So I can't tell you all the circumstances that I'm in up at Cimarron, but I tell you, I'm in this place of just going, God, I got to hear from you. I got to know that what I've heard from you, because friends, let me tell you this: if we don't begin to discern what God is saying to us and really understand what the truth of it is, then even what he says to us can be distorted. And I got in that place where I'm cloudy quite a bit of the time, but this time I was really cloudy. So I'm doing my exercises, and I'm praying this prayer. God, you got to show me, you got to tell me what's going on in my life. Have I been hearing from you, or am I crazy, or what's going on? And I see this silver thing in the dirt, and so I reach over and I pick it up, and guess what it is? A 22 bullet. I can't make this stuff up, friends. I mean, I just can't make it up. I mean, it sounds nutty anyway. And I had a moment there with God. This is not the bullet. It got thrown away. But it was a silver bullet. And it had a dent in it. And I felt like what God was saying to me. Don't doubt when I speak to you. And friends, that's exactly what was going on in Hannah. He understood my heart. God wants to talk to you about your heart. What's going on in your heart. He understands the pain you're in. Number 5 is this. When we know that our barrenness is ending. Verse 20. So in the course of time, Hannah conceived and gave birth to a son. In the course of time actually means when God breathes upon a situation and brings life. I love to talk about this one. God creates everything, in creation, and then the last thing that he creates is man. And here's Adam, perfect Adam, laying out before God, and he's dead. Perfect being, but he's dead. And nothing happens in Adam until what? God breathes the breath of life into his nostrils, and then he became a living being. Then he wakes up. Everything comes alive. Now here's the point. Many of us have got all the pieces of the puzzle together. Everything is there. But the situation you find yourself in, it's dead. And you know what? There's not a thing in the world you can do about it. You just have to wait on the breath of God. Now, here's something that just ticks me off when I read the scriptures. I'm sorry, it does. I've heard this all my life. God's got perfect timing. Well, I know sometimes he's blown that. He's had some golden opportunities to be early, and man, I've never seen that. And I don't know how you deal with that. But I just don't like this, is that God has this perfect timing stuff, but it seems to be pretty evident within the scriptures. And so that's a pretty hard case to argue against, wouldn't you say? It's like for 70 years you're going to be in exile and you're not coming out until the 70 years are over, period. And they get all these prophets and these preachers around saying, no, it's not going to happen that way. You're going to come out earlier. And God says, no, it's not. You're not coming out until the 70 years are over. When the 70 years are over, they came out, but not before then. It says in Galatians 4:4, in the fullness of time, God sent Jesus into the world. Not before or not after, but in the fullness of time. And here's what's going to happen. Ron, you guys can come on up. Here's what I believe God's saying. And it's not for everyone, but it is for some. That God, I did call the worship team. Here they come. That one of the ways that God really speaks to our hearts about that I'm about ready to do something is that He'll begin to produce a peace in your heart that you cannot produce yourself. You can't do it. See, and I know that some of you are sitting here and you're doing the flip-flops all over in your heart, and you're wondering, well, I wonder if God's going to come, and you're having all this what-if games going on. And I'm just going to tell you that and it's not going to happen for everyone, but it's going to happen for some, is the peace of God is going to settle on you, and that's going to be a sign to you tonight that God is ending your barrenness. It's coming to an end. For others of you, this is an encouraging word that you're not going to sense the breath of God right now, but your turn is coming. And you're not to manufacture it. You're just supposed to wait on it. And when you know that the breath of God is upon that thing, I tell you, friends, God will put things together in your life that you can never put together by yourself. And it'll just come alive. And then the third one is this. You can all stand. Is that some of you know exactly what I'm talking about because you've come through it. And what this message is speaking to you is this. And hear me closely on this. This is no small thing, friends. Those of you that have come through a season of barrenness and you know that you have now entered the land where there is fruitfulness, you are to share not only the goodness of the Lord, but the pain that you had to go through, but what God has done in your life so that you can be an encouragement to others. I just want you to open your hearts to the Lord as we sing this last song. Allow the Spirit of God to speak to you and say, God, I want my barrenness to come to an end, but I know it has to be you. Let's worship the Lord together.